And we are live. Good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in the world. I can only say so far that I'm very excited about the Flare Forge week. We are on the second day. We have Andrew with us. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing good, Victor. And for me, FYI, it is good morning. I'm calling from Toronto, Canada today. I'm at the team on site for Gold Sky this week.
Oh, that's exciting, man. So you're taking your time from the team on site to teach us something that is actually really useful and cool for developers. So first of all, I appreciate you for doing that. I think that, we were discussing this backstage, which is how do you prioritize things and, giving time to developers and for education and for creating unique content that can help others build faster and better, how important that is. So super happy to have you and you guys from Gold Sky. I have to say, you guys are amazing. Now, for context, we are doing this 5 days live stream called the Flare Forge Week. So the idea is to provide with a bunch of material for people building on Flare so that they can feel comfortable utilizing the tools and the different data protocols that we have at Flare. And today we have this wonderful topic of subgraphs and mirror pipelines on Flare introduced by Gold Sky. So, Andrew, shall we get started with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to dive in. Hello, everybody. So my name is Andrew. I am the customer success manager over at Gold Sky. To give a little bit of background into what I get to do, essentially, I work with all the various ecosystems that we build on and provide tooling for. And I basically get to work with a lot of really cool people, such as Victor, where I engage with DevRel, marketing, partnerships. Right. Basically, my main goal is how do we make it so that developers in any ecosystem or any chain that we support, how do we make it for these developers a streamlined experience? How do we make it so that, anything they want to build, it's simple, it's easy, it's reliable, it's fast. So basically my main idea as a customer success manager in my head is to be like the main proponent of, how do we support the developers and how do we make it so that building is essentially smooth, you know?
Absolutely. That's the mission. I love it. And for the people in our audience, I see we have over 20 people here. Some are just joining. So I'm going to ask you to please reshare this with others. If you are on X, we are streaming on the dev account. Please leave a like and a comment. If you have any questions as well, we're taking it there. And the same goes for people in YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, give a like, leave comments, ask questions, feel free to participate because all of this is for you guys so that you have the best resources available and you can clarify any sort of questions you might have. So Andrew, I think we are on time to get started, so maybe you want to share your screen.
Yeah, for sure. So before I really dive in and share my screen, I'll just kind of give a quick overview to people of what exactly even indexing is, right? Because for some
Right.
people, they might have not heard about it and they might not be familiar. So to kind of give a really high level overview of what indexing is, essentially, if you're building out some kind of dApp or protocol or just any kind of project that requires reading on-chain data, it's a very difficult process sometimes that can be slow with a lot of infra headaches if you're just reading directly from the chain. So if you're just making RPC calls, you might often get rate limited or the reliability, it could drop. And, it's one of those things where you're almost like trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? If you want to get a specific type of data, whether it's an asset or a contract or, just something very custom to your needs, if you're looking at an entire chain, it's a lot more difficult to really get that quickly and efficiently. So essentially, indexing is a solution where it makes it very efficient to take a look at what data is on chain. And you're basically getting these structured databases, these data structures you're creating, and you're querying them. So you're basically making it so that instead of having to just scrape through the entire chain to find what you need, it's almost like you're doing what Google did for searching through the internet, right? How with Google, you type in your keyword and it directs you to what you need. Essentially, indexing is a similar type of mentality where you're getting really custom about exactly the information you need, and you're just looking on chain in an efficient way, and you're pulling that information. So that's essentially what GoldSky is. We offer developers tooling to index on-chain data and make it so that it's easy and reliable and quick. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and show all of you what the GoldSky app looks like, just for reference, so you can kind of get a good idea of what to expect. So to begin, essentially there's two main products to keep in mind when using GoldSky, and both have very cool use cases. It just kind of really depends on what your needs are and what it is you're building out in the Flare ecosystem. But we're going to start off with talking about what are called subgraphs. And so essentially what you can think about a subgraph is, what you're going to be doing is taking a look at a specific smart contract, right? Let's say, for example, for this demo, we're going to be using wrapped Flare because it's a really popular token in the ecosystem. And we'll grab the contract from the Flare scan in just a moment. But essentially what you're doing is you're taking a contract, and what you're doing is you're deploying this subgraph in a way where you're basically querying directly from that contract in a really efficient way. You can almost think of it as like a magnifying glass, where you're basically highlighting a specific part of the network, and then you're pulling that. And the way that you're pulling that is via GraphQL endpoint. So you're essentially creating this API endpoint that you can plug into your application, or whether it's your front end or your back end. You basically have this endpoint that you're calling, and then you get to use the data that it provides. And it's just a really, really efficient way. I mean, developers in general are very familiar, usually from a general Web 2 standpoint, of using API endpoints, right? That's just like a cornerstone building block of any kind of application. So this is just a really easy way to basically plug in Web 3 to your application by calling this endpoint. So whether you're creating some kind of dashboard on Flare because you want to track liquidity, or you want to track certain wallets or certain tokens, it's a really cool way to basically call this endpoint and query the exact kind of wallet addresses you want to look at, or the exact contract you want to get more insights on, right? So whether it's for analytics purposes, or maybe you have some kind of application that not only is for analytics purposes, but your front end is basically built off of certain on-chain events. So what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, you have a subgraph deployed, and anytime a certain kind of event happens, like let's say a token is traded, or a certain person that has like a wallet address you're tracking, let's say they make a certain action because you want to do some kind of portfolio replicator, right? Any kind of app that might depend on-chain activities, you can create a webhook to basically trigger automatic actions. And I'll show you how to do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're going to go ahead and dive into deploying an actual subgraph. But just to kind of recap, too long didn't read version, subgraphs are essentially endpoints that you generate, where you plug them into your app or your dashboard, or whatever program you have, and however you want to call that information, and then you query data from that endpoint. So in this case, you hit deploy subgraph. You're going to notice a few different variables that you'll want to plug in. So here, how it says my-subgraph, this is just essentially the naming format. You just want to make sure to follow that. So in this example, we'll go with Flare demo, just because, that's just pretty clear what we're doing here. Now, contract address. This is going to be where it's an important part for you to understand, what kind of contract address should I call? What type of token do I want to look at? What is it exactly that I'm doing? So in this case, you're just going to want to go on Flare scan, and everything you need will be found here. So for this example, we're using wrapped Flare because, of course, it's a very popular token. And in this case, what you want to do for step one is hit token contract. So once you're in token contract, you're just going to go ahead, copy that address, drop it into contract address over here. Network, of course, we're on Flare, so we're going to choose Flare. Now, these other two portions, start block and contract ABI. So to kind of give you an insight into what these both are. So let's say, for example, you don't want to query information about the contract from the very beginning of the contract. Maybe you just want to look at data from, the last day or the last week, and there's a specific block start that you would prefer. So it's really helpful to just put in that block, because assuming you don't need, complete historical data. It'll just be more efficient because the subgraph will have to index less data if it's more specific to the time frame you're looking for. So in this case, for start block, you can go to transactions and just take a look at any recent block. So what I'm going to do is just copy one of these guys, put it in here. And I think I'm going to replace the 9 with, let's just say, a 2, just to kind of go back, a few amount of blocks, just so that we have a little more content than just, the most recent transfers. Because, I mean, this one happened when, like, a minute ago. So not too many transfers since then. So I just took a block earlier, like a little bit earlier, from the 9 to the 2. So that's the start block. We're just going to choose from there. Now, contract ABI, one way you can think of this is it's essentially the blueprint for how to translate on-chain activities into actionable insights. So what that means is you basically take the ABI from the contract, and it's going to map out the entities that you're going to be indexing. So in this case, to get the contract ABI, in the token contract page, you go to contracts. And here I believe there is both, mainnet and testnet. So we'll go with mainnet because that's what we're indexing now.
So I have a question in the meantime,
Yeah.
because I can imagine if I'm a new developer, I'm just learning about the smart contracts, and then I learn about the explorers, right? And that's where like I find blockchain data. Then my question would be, how would we explain like the value of indexing data using this kind of tool compared to just going and try to ask the API for a block explorer and utilizing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example would be, just like in a normal Web 2 app, right? Let's say you want to do some kind of action like sign up for an account or make a transaction to buy something, or, just basically make any kind of modification to your profile, just anything you want to do in an app in general in Web 2. It's always going to be important for it to be quick, right? You don't want to be waiting for 30 seconds or a minute, or you don't want to have to try and then try multiple times. So essentially, you can just think of it as like reliability and speed, right? So when you're just calling an RPC directly, it can just be slower, and oftentimes it might just not even work as well as intended. Whereas with the subgraph, it's basically one of those things where the reliability is going to be higher and it's faster and easier. So it's about the usability, right? The user experience, where if you have your app powered by a subgraph, then it'll just be faster and it'll be more smooth. So it's one of those things where, if you're trying to replicate that Web 2 speed in your Web 3 app, indexing is going to be one of those things that is going to be critical infrastructure to allow the speed to be fast in the back end. And
Super
I'm
clear.
not too sure what's going on here with the website. Maybe I'll just go from the top. All right, there we go. Cool. So back to the top. So essentially, you're in the token contract page. Now, to get the ABI, you go to this contract tab here. And one note that is very helpful to know is you see this green check mark that says contract source code verified. That's something that is important that you want to make sure is to essentially confirm it's a legit contract, because, of course, when it comes to smart contracts, especially in the decentralized world, basically anyone can deploy something, and you want to make sure that whatever contract you're using is a safe one and a legit one. So if it's got this green check mark, that is a good sign. Also, sometimes there will be a proxy of a contract. Like, as an example, I did the other day a demo where I was indexing USDC on Ethereum mainnet. And if you just go to the USDC token, the contract that's using is actually a proxy. So to index USDC, you would want to go into the original contract. And there's a way where in the contract page on the Explorer, you would click, is this a proxy? And then you would confirm that. But here we don't have to do that because it says that it is contract source code verified. So that makes it easy for us, and it's a great example. But to kind of continue forward, contract ABI is over here. And just for some reference, if you take a look at what is even in the contract ABI, you'll see that there's some essentially keywords, right? Like for example, governance, name, symbol, right? So essentially, this is like the blueprint for what the subgraph is. You basically pulling from on-chain data. So as on-chain events are occurring, they're going to be called entities, and I'll show you in just a moment. So once you have everything you need, contract address, network, start block, contract ABI, you deploy the subgraph. Just takes a moment for that to get ready. All right.
Absolutely. And while this gets ready, it's a perfect time for me to interrupt you, Andrew, and ask to the people in our audience. We have over 150 people in the room now. If you have any questions, this is your moment. You can also watch this on YouTube or on X. We're going to be doing this live stream absolutely every day of the week, and you have a wonderful opportunity to learn, to help others, and to start building on Flare. So make sure you subscribe, you follow along, and you ask as many questions as you may have.
Yeah, and even after this workshop, if you ever have any questions about Gold Sky, you can always contact our tech services team at support@goldsky.com. You can also go directly on X and engage with us either by commenting on a post or sending us a message at goldsky.io. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. You can even contact me personally. My Telegram is Andrew Gelman, AndrewGelman. So our team is here to support you. You know, it's always actually even helpful for us to talk to developers who are building, because the more insights we get into the problems and pain points you have, the better it is for us, because then we can kind of make the experience more fine-tuned and constantly improve it. So definitely reach out anytime. And all right, so we've deployed the subgraph. As you can see, it's indexing, so it'll take a little bit of time. But while it's doing that, we can already take a look at some pretty useful metrics and have a lot of information available to us now. So essentially, as you are indexing, over here, it's called entities. Entities, you can just think of essentially just the amount of storage and data that you are taking up. So entities are very important for you to keep in mind as you are deploying subgraphs and deploying mirror pipelines, because that's essentially how you're built. So you want to make sure that you're being cost conscious and you're not just deploying ton of subgraphs to track entire chains and not keeping track of entities, because that'll rack up. You don't want that to happen. So you want to be pretty cost efficient. And so taking a look at your entities and being mindful about the kind of data you're looking at will keep you from any kind of billing surprises, right? But in your account as well, too, there's the billing summary. So you can kind of keep track at a higher level of, how much you're deploying. But essentially, these first top two metrics over here, entities, very helpful to just keep in mind, how much data you're actually going through, right? And for example, what even is an entity? In more common wording, if you scroll down and you expand entities, it's going to show you basically what type of entities you are indexing. So kind of referring back to that ABI, the contract ABI is the blueprint. A lot of the wording that we saw here, right? Like for example, governance. Do we see? Yeah, so there's like governance information here, right? And then let's see if there's, what other words can we find that match? Total supply, address, deposit. You see, so basically the ABI is a blueprint that's mapped out to the indexing the data that you're indexing. And so when you expand entities, this is basically going to show you that blueprint from what the ABI shows. And on the right, the count, that's just basically how many times those events occurred, right? So in this smart contract, from the block that we started, based on the contract address we used, there were 31,000 transfers. So pretty bullish Flare ecosystem, if you ask me, because I didn't go that far back. So that shows that a lot of transfers are happening with the Flare token, wrapped Flare. But
Yeah,
anyways,
and one quick question about this. When it comes to instances, or sorry, entities,
mhm.
uh, my question is, I remember at some point we talked about this. This has been increasingly nicely of Flare. So how would one interpret that from a developer's perspective?
Yeah. I mean, from a developer's perspective, developer activity is always a very good metric for any kind of chain, right? If you're seeing more developers building out, that basically means that there's interest to build products in that ecosystem, because those developers believe there's interest for users to use the ecosystem, right? I mean, if you're a developer and you have an idea, you probably are building it because you believe somebody will want to use the project, or there will be people that can benefit from what you build, right? So developer activity is always a very good sign for an ecosystem, because it's essentially showing you that there's demand to be using that ecosystem, and developers believe in what they're building, and they're actually putting time and resources into it. So entities is actually a very perfect example of that, where it's quite literally resources such as time, effort, and data storage. And it's showing that data is being used and data is being looked at and apps are being built out. So as entities kind of grow within a network, that's just a good sign that there's, activity happening.
Thanks.
And so essentially, 19%, it's taken its time. It's going to be done very soon. I mean, it's one of those things where it really just depends on how much data you're indexing for how quickly the subgraph will go through all the data, right? Which just makes sense. But now to kind of segue into, okay, I've deployed the subgraph. I see all these metrics, I'm seeing all this information, I'm seeing these logs, but what do I actually do now? How do I actually use this in my app? So you'll see over here, there's this GraphQL link. Earlier in the presentation, I was talking about the API endpoint that you can basically call. So that's what this is here. Now, generally, you would take, the API endpoint, you would plug that into your app, and you probably wouldn't just go into this page and, just hit play to query. But this is just a very good visualizer for you to kind of have insights into what is the information that this endpoint is displaying for me, right? So as you can see from this query, this is a transfer query where we're getting some information about transfers. We're seeing the address of where it came from, the timestamp, the block number, the value, right? So essentially, let's say you will have some kind of dashboard app that you create and you want it to display most recent transfers on your dashboard. You can call this endpoint, choose which kind of parameters you want it to display, and then it would display this on your app in your front end, or in your database in your back end, however you wanted to use this information. But basically, anytime you deploy Subgraph, you get this API endpoint that you can call, and it's very easy to just use that in your application. So really, it just depends on how creative you can get about what kind of information you need. But anytime you call this endpoint, you will see here that the API requests will go up. So you can even have insights into, the latency of your API, and then how many requests you're making, and, average handler time. So this is a really cool just health metric page to give you insights into everything related to your subgraph. But yeah, really, it just comes down to how creative can you get, once you're building your app, what kind of data do you want to use, and how are you going to call that endpoint? Are you going to surface that in your front end? Is it going to power your back end? Possibilities really are endless. And before moving on from subgraphs, there's a couple features I wanted to highlight because they're very, very useful in just kind of speeding up that developer process.
Andrew, I just realized that
Yeah,
we have a quick question
sure.
from Ivan. Shout out to you, man, for asking live. Where and how is the data stored?
Good question. So all of this data, it's essentially they're like hosted subgraphs. So the data is stored on our end for the subgraphs, and then the endpoint is just called. Now with Mirror, which I'll cover in a bit, it's actually a different story where the data is stored in your own database. So it's pretty cool. There's differences, but with subgraphs, for example, you're just basically calling this endpoint, and the data is stored, I believe, on our end. I would have to double check to confirm, but this is just an endpoint you call, so it's not any storage you have to do. That's costs that we just kind of have on our end. Cool.
Thanks.
Well, two things that I wanted to highlight: tags and webhooks. So, as an example, for this subgraph endpoint, we've got 1.0.0 as the subgraph version. let's say I wanted to deploy an updated version of the subgraph where I make some adjustments. Maybe I query something different. Maybe it's a different contract. Just for some reason, I decided I want to update the subgraph and release a new version. Maybe I have version 2.0 of Flare demo where it's the same subgraph, but an updated version. But in my app, I was using the endpoint 1.0. So that would be a little bit annoying because I'd have to go to my app, update from 1.0 to 2.0. And then anytime I do a subgraph new release, I would have to go into my app and kind of update which endpoint is being called, right? However, if you use the tag feature, let's say, for example, we'll call this tag prod, then that is no longer a problem you have to deal with because a new API endpoint is created. And instead of 1.0.0, it's prod. So basically what that means is anytime you deploy a new subgraph version, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, however many versions you have, you can just use in your app's backend the API endpoint referencing prod. And that's basically just like a placeholder so that any subgraph version you have will direct to prod. So that way you don't have to change anything in your app. You just call that one endpoint, and regardless of how many subgraph versions you have, it's just going to be directed to that. So that's just one of those things where it's small, it's a little thing, but it's very convenient when you're developing and constantly iterating. So it's one of those, developer pain points that we just kind of abstracted away just to kind of make it easier. Now, next up, we've got webhooks. So webhooks, you're probably familiar with if you're just developed apps in general, but basically, let's say you have a subgraph where anytime a certain type of on-chain event occurs, you want to trigger some kind of automatic action, whether it's in your backend to update some table, or maybe it's something in your front end, like a notification or, some kind of point unlock, right? Whatever it is, you can create webhooks to basically automatically, action on any kind of activity in the subgraph. So this is a very cool way to basically automate some of your functionality. And so webhooks are a very popular, very powerful tool to use. So to kind of recap it, you deploy a subgraph, you choose the contract, you choose the block, you be mindful of how many entities you're using, you have an endpoint that you can call and make requests on, and you have tags and webhooks that you can use to simplify that process. So that's essentially subgraphs. Now, subgraphs are definitely powerful. They're very useful. However, they can often fall short if you wanted to do, let's say multiple types of different chain insights, right? You wanted to track not just Flare, but maybe you wanted to track Ethereum as well, or you wanted to track, any kind of other chain. You can basically have one subgraph per chain, but you can't deploy one subgraph across multiple chains, right? So that's one limitation. Another limitation is if your app were to start scaling and really, really be bumping up in usage, let's say it's not just a few hundred people, but it's thousands of people and maybe hundreds of thousands of people, who knows how big your app can get. As you start reaching scalability and really having a big popular project, that's when subgraphs may potentially not be fast enough, or they may not be able to, handle the load. To be fair, subgraphs can handle a lot, but there's definitely times when maybe it just makes more sense to use something like Mirror. So now we're going to segue into Mirror. And Mirror is a very, very cool product because it's similar to subgraphs in a sense that you're creating these data structures to efficiently index on-chain data, and you're really, really optimizing how you read on-chain data or how you use it. But the difference is, instead of it being in an endpoint that you call, with Mirror pipelines, you're putting that data directly into your database. So basically, when it comes to latency and speed of using that data, you're only limited to the speed of how quickly you can query your own database. And by database, I mean ClickHouse, Postgres, Amazon S3, Elasticsearch, right? It basically just, there's many different sinks. We call it a sink, which is where the entities are written into. So it really just depends on what preference you have and what system you're already building on. But essentially, to create a pipeline, you hit new pipeline and you are redirected to what we call the Gold Sky Flow page. And this is basically where you just create the pipeline. Now, all of this, by the way, deploying a subgraph, deploying a pipeline, you can do all of that in the Gold Sky CLI. So you can download the Gold Sky CLI, hit Gold Sky, and then there's like this CLI experience where you have your project, you can, deploy on Mirror, you can deploy Subgraph. There's all these various commands to just basically do everything in the CLI. Because a lot of developers, they prefer just working in the terminal. They don't really, they just want to have a coding experience fully, right? So, but if you want, you can use the front end because it's super easy and it's like, basically drag and drop. So in this case, we're going to
So
take.
is there one quick question there,
Yeah,
Andre?
yeah.
Is there any like particular case in which one would recommend one instead of the other, or something that you might have noticed from usage from developers uh, about using the front end or the command?
It's honestly just preference. You can do the same thing both with the front end and the CLI. Some people just prefer to code. Some people prefer the visuals. It really just depends. But as far as usability and capability, it's the same.
It's the same. All right, cool.
Yeah. So in this case, we're taking the data source, and I'll use for the same example also wrapped flare because that was just what we used for the subgraph. So we'll just stay consistent there. But essentially, you're going to choose data source. We're going to go flare, and you're going to see a few different things pop up. So there's raw blocks data sets. There's my subgraph that pops up. So what that means is when you're creating a pipeline, you're basically creating this data stream where it goes from on-chain into your database. And these data sets we have here, they're basically like pre-indexed data so that it can be much faster. Same with a subgraph, because assuming the subgraph, at some point completes in the, near term, it's already indexed. So you can use that as a data source. But in this example, we'll do something like enrich transactions, right? Or maybe here we'll go raw blocks, raw logs, right? There's various examples you can do. But essentially, when you choose what you want, you're choosing either beginning or current often, right? That's the same for raw blocks as it is raw logs, right? So basically what that means is, do you want to have historical data where you're looking back, you're analyzing, you're taking a look at what's been happening on the chain? Or do you want to track from here on out? Because one thing that's very cool about data streaming pipelines is that it's pretty much real time. Everything is going into your database, and as it's happening on chain, it's just basically live streaming essentially as it happens. Right when it happens on chain, it's like such a crazy small latency that it's pretty much already in your database. So you can choose to either start indexing from the beginning or from current, and that's just really depending on your preference. But for this, filter by contract address, we'll just take this same contract over here, drop it in. And so basically you can think of it as similar with subgraphs, how you choose the contract you want, choose where it starts from. This is a similar kind of flow, except for this case, we're just choosing it as a source. And then now the next step is going to be called a transform. So when you're transforming, you can do a couple different ways. You can do via custom SQL or HTTP handler. Custom SQL, that's essentially you get this little box that pops up and you click into here. And these are the different variables that the raw logs provide, right? Kind of similar to the contract ABI and the subgraph where it's like a blueprint. This is basically the same kind of blueprint, right? Where you can choose what you kind of want to display. And this can be very useful. Like, let's say, for example, you're combining various sources. Let's say you're combining one contract address as one source with another contract as another, and you're combining them in a transform, and you want to see across both of these contracts, what is this specific address doing? Like, you only want to see any results from either contract from a specific address. So you can add in a custom address in here. You can add in custom, parameters you want to index. Basically, you're only limited by your imagination for the kind of, custom SQL you want to put in here. So it's a very cool way to get extremely granular about the data that you're looking at, because again, if you're going to be looking at an on-chain at an entire network, you will probably not want to just always index the entire network. You might want just a specific contract or even a specific subset of events within that contract. So when you choose a source, the transform is going to be a very important part for you to basically customize the exact kind of data you're looking at to minimize time, right? As far as how long it takes to backfill it, how much information it is generally being added into the pipeline, and then also cost, right? If you're much more custom about the data you're looking at, you're going to save costs as well. So this is just a very efficient and helpful part of the process. So once you've picked the contract you want from where you want it to come from, you've customized it by making a custom SQL query, and you've pretty much nailed it down to exactly what you want. Next up would be connecting the sink. And actually, before I move on to the sink, so external handler, which is another way to customize the data, it's basically via HTTP. My understanding, I don't fully comprehend exactly what it is, but my understanding is you're pretty much moving this somewhere else, customizing it elsewhere, and then bringing it back. So very similar to SQL, how you're kind of customizing it here, except versus here, you're doing it in your own system and then kind of bringing back what you want. That's my understanding of external handlers, but we do have documentation on docs.goldsky.com that touches more on what that is. But essentially, last step, once you've gotten your source, you've customized the data to be the exact subset of information you need, you choose your sink. So in this case, we have a ClickHouse demo database that we already have connected, but let's say you don't yet have anything connected. So you would do create new sink and then select sink type. So as you can see, we've got Postgres, MySQL, S3, right? A bunch of different options. And you might be thinking, okay, well, which option is best for me? That's honestly just really just dependent on your use case and how you want to be building, because each of these have their own benefits. And, that's even just unrelated to GoldSky, right? That's just how do you want your database to function? What kind of, optimizations do you prefer? Do you have, a database in mind where you'd rather search through it, or you'd rather have it power some kind of backend, or, whatever it is your use case, various sinks and various databases just have their own benefits. So you have the flexibility to choose whichever one you want. But in this case, we're going with ClickHouse because they are a pretty great one. So essentially what you want to do is you make your source, you choose your, customization, you pick your sink, and then last but not least, you name it. So then once that's saved, you deploy it. And let's see, I guess I can actually deploy it. I don't know how much information it will be putting into the database, but we can give it a shot.
Let's break things.
Let's break things.
And see what happens. Now, Andrew, thank you so much for doing this live. I just want to comment that we have on the mainstream post only 500 views of the post itself on the algorithm, and yet we have over 400 people tuning in. So this is one of the most outstanding conversion rates that I have ever seen.
I love to hear that.
Yeah, congrats on that. And one thing though, maybe we can go over this flow again at a high level, just kind of summarizing things.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want me to do that for both Mirror and Subgraphs, or just Mirror?
I think Mirror.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, so I'll just kind of wrap it up with showing what it can look like in the database, because I think I can get it to work. So let's see. So this is starting. So once this is indexed, let's see. I'm going to sync my database here. Let's see if it pops up yet. Not yet. It's still loading. But essentially, whatever database you use, when you deploy the Mirror pipeline, you're going to have a similar kind of page here as we did with Subgraphs, where it basically shows you, what are the sources you have, what are the sinks you have, how many entities are written. Records received versus records written. Think of it as records received is like how much data is basically coming in, and then records written is how much data is actually going into your database. So basically here, it's showing that 42 records have been written. So I believe that means they have been written into my database. So if I'm not mistaken, they should be here live. Let's see. Sync one more time. Well, anyways, that's how it is with pipelines. And here, let me go back actually. Let's say I wanted to edit this. And by the way, anytime you have a pipeline deployed, what's very efficient about pipelines compared to subgraphs is you can just edit them at any time, because think of it this way. A pipeline is like literally a pipeline where water's flowing in it, and you can at any time update the way that the water is flowing through, and you don't have to redeploy. For example, with a subgraph, any adjustments you want to make, you have to redeploy and reindex, and it could take kind of a lot of time, because let's say you have a subgraph that's deployed and it takes, I don't know, an hour to index it. So you would have to wait another hour to deploy an updated version. Whereas with the pipeline, it's basically live streaming at all times. So what you can just do is update the pipeline so that anything happening moving forward from the save is just immediately implemented, right? So very, very cool way. But to kind of give a high level overview of Mirror one more time before we wrap up, you pick your data source. And by data source, that means choose your chain, choose your data set. And the data set can either be a pre-made data set that we have for you to just select the option for, or a subgraph that you've already maybe deployed and you wanted to use that, right? So essentially, you pick your data source, you choose where it starts indexing, you can filter by a specific address, and then you customize it with either some custom SQL to shape and filter your data. We call that a transform. Or you can use an external handler, which is enriching your data via HTTP, right? So you basically choose your source, customize your data, and then you pick your sink. And you pick your sink by choosing the database you want that data to go into, and then it just appears in your database. Although I might have set something up wrong because I'm not seeing it here. So I don't know what I did. But generally, if you set it up correctly, then it does pop up. And
Yeah, no
that
worries
is
about it.
the
It's
demo.
okay if we break things. The demo was super, super clear. Let me put here my screen so people can see what's next for the agenda. One moment. And in the meantime, guys, we have over 500 of you here today. That's amazing. I do want to see more questions if you have any. If not, it means that, Andrew was super, super clear, which I think he was. But anyway, in the meantime, let me show you what we have planned next, right? So today we cover subgraphs and mirror pipelines on Flare using Gold Sky. It was quite useful, the mirror thing. I have ever seen that before. And I think that going forward into the future, at some point, maybe we're going to see something with LLMs doing this kind of thing, in which you kind of prompt the instructions and you build the entire pipeline that way. I don't know, just a thing that I'm thinking off the top of my head,
Yeah,
fantasizing things here for developers.
that's
Uh,
100% going to happen for sure.
yeah, I mean, I think we are far, and you guys are kind of early. So that's good news, I would say. But anyway, yeah. And yesterday we explored a crowdfunding application utilizing the FTSO. Tomorrow we have F assets with Chris Taps, one of our main dev bros at Flare. And then on Thursday we have tokenized real estate. Really interesting stuff. You can utilize there the FTSO and the FTC, two of our main data protocols. And for Friday, we're going to discuss verifiable random selection on Flare. So we have quite a nice schedule ahead of us. Today it was very interesting to learn about tooling on Flare for indexing. And yeah, Andrew, is there anything you would like to make as a sort of maybe call to action or final tips or recommendations for developers?
Yeah. I would just say go to docs.goldsky.com and check out all of our guides. There's a lot of really helpful, just step-by-step guides to show you how to deploy Subgraph, how to create a pipeline, a lot of good tips and tricks. And don't feel shy. If you want to reach out and ask for help, don't hesitate. Support at goldsky.com. That's going to be a really, really good resource. Because if, let's say, for example, you have a specific deployment where something is broken or not working as you want, You just send us the link to your project and tell us exactly what's happening, and our team will walk you through how to fix it, or even give you tips on how to optimize it. Let's say you have a deployment that's working fine, but you want to make it faster. So you can reach out,
Sure.
and our team will help you with that too. So don't feel like a stranger. Reach out anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrew. We left in the comments a link to the documentation of Cold Sky and Flare. Make sure to check that out. You also have a lot of information in our developer documentation. So if you go and type Flare Dev Hub on Google or whatever, you're gonna find us pretty easily. If you have any other questions, guys, just make sure to ask on Telegram, or you can reach out to any of us. We are always available to help you. Thank you so much, Andrew, once again. And thanks for the people in our audience. It was a wonderful streaming today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for hosting. Always appreciate coming on.
Yes, sir. See you on the next one. Bye bye, guys.